Welcome to a politically charged edition of TGAF, Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by Shampoo, Travis, Besaw, and Kirshner, CPAs and business consultants. I am Tim Graham from The Athletic, here with Matthew Fairburn of The Athletic, Jonah Bronstein of Bronstein and Associates, and Ryan Nobles of CNN, a Western New Yorker born in North Tonawanda, went to Cassadaga Valley High in Chautauqua County, a Brockport grad, and now in his, I think, 6th year at CNN, Ryan? Is that right?
Tim, you know my bio better than my wife. That's pretty impressive. Right down.
Well, where's your wife from, Ryan?
So my wife is from Central New York. She grew up between Albany and Utica. She grew
He
up
has
in
no
a
idea
town
where
called
North
Fort
Tonawanda
Plain, New
is.
York, which is yeah. She does because she's been there a couple of times. But yeah, Fort Plain, Section 3 or Section 1 school, I think, Albany area. So yeah, and her family still lives there. So that's when we make our way back to upstate New York. Generally, that's where we are.
Well, thanks for joining us. SUNY Brockport grad and has been at CNN for 6 years. And Ryan's been on the show before, and the last time he was on, the coronavirus outbreak was hitting hard, and it was new, and we didn't know much about it. And he was covering the Bernie Sanders campaign at the time. And he is now covering the Donald Trump campaign, and he is in Salt Lake City right now in advance of the vice presidential debate on Wednesday in Salt Lake City. So Ryan, I guess a thumbnail sketch here. How has this been? There's no routine coverage of a campaign ever, but it's had to have been very difficult to plan for this.
Yeah, Tim, when we spoke last time in March, I think a couple of days after that, I flew back to Washington and was basically covering the end of the Bernie Sanders campaign from my back office, slash spare bedroom in Northern Virginia, and didn't go anywhere for essentially 3 months. The Sanders campaign ended mid-March, and they quickly shifted me over to the Trump campaign, but everything was essentially put on hold. We didn't know what we were going to do or how we were going to do it. I had to kind of get up to speed with covering the Trump campaign. I was completely on the opposite end of the political spectrum and covering Bernie Sanders. So it meant, kind of reintroducing myself to a lot of Republican contacts and people in Trump world, which is kind of difficult to do via Zoom and telephone calls as opposed to in-person meetings. And then my first time back out traveling was the big, turned out to not be that big rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma that the president had, which was kind of our first indication as to how unimportant they seem to be taking the serious surrounding the coronavirus. And since then, I've been to about a dozen of these Trump rallies where, they are for the most part outside, but, you're talking about thousands of people shoulder to shoulder, not wearing masks, seeming to care all that much with the spread of the virus. And now here we have the president himself, Secretary Kayleigh McEnany, add her to the list of people that have tested positive for the coronavirus. So we're breaking that on the Tim Graham show. But yeah,
Holy smokes.
it's been a surreal experience. Yeah.
Well, Ryan, I guess, we're going to talk about the Buffalo Bills, which is the main reason we have you on. I like to talk to Bills fans on Monday, and things are going great. They're 4-0, but we have people on because they're interesting. And part of the reason is, what you're up to there in Salt Lake City. Did we lose you? Did we lose Ryan? Ryan, are you still there? Okay, we may have lost Ryan. We'll just keep talking until he comes back.
Well, I could take over. I mean, according to Wikipedia, Ryan graduated from Brockport at the top of his class in 1998, and 6 years later, I graduated at the bottom of my class at Brockport. You can balance that out a little bit.
Here's Ryan coming back.
Sorry about that, guys.
No, that's okay. Who are we to blame? Who's to blame here? Is this Marriott?
Yeah, it's the Sheridan in Salt Lake. This is the.
See, you got to stay at a Marriott property.
It's a Marriott property there. Sheraton,
Sheridan
is now
Marriott.
under.
Right.
Listen, I'm full-on ambassador status for Marriott, so I'm don't worry about that. I'll keep my video off though. That might help make the connection a little stronger.
Okay. So Ryan, as I was saying, we're going to talk about the Bills, and that's kind of, that's the fun stuff. Well, hey, covering a vice presidential debate's probably fun too. There's a lot of metaphors between the sports world and politics and game planning, strategy, all this other stuff. But I guess before we get even to the vice presidential debate, you're talking about getting ready or to moving from the Bernie Sanders campaign to Donald Trump's campaign. What's that decision like? Do you have any say in that? Because how do your bosses, or what are the meetings like when it's finally determined that Joe Biden is going to be the Democratic nominee for president, where your role gets shifted to, because you do have a lot more familiarity with the Democratic planks and all of that stuff. And Bernie Sanders is going to be around the Joe Biden campaign in some fashion versus going to the Republican side and covering the incumbent president. It is different. But from a journalistic standpoint, I was curious how that goes.
Yeah, and well, I think, and compound that with the pandemic, right? So this wasn't a situation where a decision was made where I'm around my bosses and my editors on a regular basis, and we can kind of just have a free-flowing conversation about the next stage. What's interesting about working for a place like CNN is that we have so many resources that it was a luxury to be able to focus on just one candidate for a year and a half. So there was a bit of a kind of a shock to the system when he dropped out, because it was like, okay, this has like been my world for a year and a half. Now, what do I do next? It'd be like if the Bills disbanded, and if you're a beat reporter for the Bills, and what are you supposed to do next? So
going to cover the Patriots, I guess, because you want to go with the total opposite, right?
Right, exactly. Be going the complete opposite way. So there wasn't
this?
a lot.
How about covering Rex Ryan?
Right. Yeah, no, that's a good example. Yeah, totally. Exactly. And so, I think what had happened was, we expected at a certain point in time that the White House team, at least members of the White House team, Caitlin Collins in particular, who's one of our really terrific White House correspondents, would shift her focus more from covering the White House day to day, the administration, into covering the campaign. And what happened was, because of the coronavirus, and it still continues to this day, the White House beat itself has been just inundated with the responsibility of covering this massive story, that it was difficult for Caitlin and Jim Acosta, who's our chief White House correspondent, to pay as close attention to the campaign machinations, the day-to-day of what was going on in the campaign, where they were spending ads, how they were targeting their focus. And so that's when my boss came to me and said, this is the responsibility we want you to take on. You're going to basically support the White House team, and you take that off of their shoulders. They don't have to worry about the campaign day to day. And these are a team that I've worked with a lot in the past. So I was able to kind of fit into that really well. It's challenging in that, I'm competing against reporters on this beat who've been covering the president for more than 5 years. I covered him a little bit before he got elected and a little bit into the transition. But then after that, I covered Capitol Hill and then was covering the midterm races, then eventually Bernie. So it took a while to get up to speed, but we've kind of got it figured out. And it's crazy because, it seems like every time, Caitlin or Jim, now they're going to be with you on the campaign full time. Like, this is a good example where we are in Salt Lake. Caitlin was originally supposed to be out here with me in Salt Lake, and there's just too much happening in Washington. She's not able to break away. So I'm going to have to take up, the lion's share of the coverage in Salt Lake. So, it's a blessing and a curse to be at a place that covers every single piece of news that comes down. But luckily we have the resources to support it.
Ryan, what is the dynamic like when you come from covering Bernie Sanders, going to Donald Trump's campaign? I'm curious about the response from sources around the president. And, it's not a secret how he feels about CNN, and it's not a secret how he feels about Bernie Sanders. So from a sourcing standpoint and a journalism standpoint, and the day-to-day of doing your job, what is the dynamic like?
It's really hard, honestly. I do think what's interesting about covering Sanders and Trump is that, and I think I gave this example to you guys the last time we were on, is that politics the spectrum isn't a straight line, it's a circle. There's a Venn diagram here where a lot of the things that Trump supporters are concerned about and the reason they support Donald Trump are very similar to some of the things that Sanders supporters agree with. They just come at it from a different perspective. So I actually, there are crossovers in that perspective. But in terms of the campaign apparatus, it's much different. I mean, first of all, Sanders had a lot of money, but he didn't have the whole infrastructure of the White House and the administration behind him. That's part of it. And also the Trump campaign, there were folks in the Trump campaign that I'd known from covering previous people, Republicans along the way. But there were a lot of people who, this was my first time getting to know them. And you have to build a trust factor with sources. And, candidly, there's, the president himself is not someone that you can trust on a day-to-day basis. I think it's pretty fair to say that. So there's a little bit of a calculation there in terms of the information that you're getting. And also, and you alluded to this, Matthew, the Trump campaign has, frankly, a adversarial relationship with the mainstream press. I mean, he calls us the enemy of the people. I'm at a Trump event and he literally points directly at me and tells everyone that I'm sick and that I am there to hurt them and that all I do is lie. And then those people will start a chorus of CNN sucks and screaming at me while I'm in the middle of trying to do a live shot. So, some of that is theater. When I talk to a lot of these sources, the relationship isn't that toxic, but just the overall frame of it does make it a lot difficult, much more difficult for us to do our jobs. And there's always a little bit of a adversarial relationship with journalists and those that we cover. We should be skeptical of whoever we cover, but it's like this at, the 10th degree. It's like nothing I've ever experienced before.
Ryan, what has the dynamic been like for you and the other reporters on the campaign trail with these campaign events? We know there have been some coronavirus transmission. Even some of these events have been called super spreader events. How do you personally navigate that, keep yourself safe while still doing your job as a reporter?
So listen, it's a risk, if I weren't doing this job, I would not be behaving this way is the simple way to say it. I did a live report for one of our affiliates in Australia at one of the events I was at. And the Australian anchors looked at the crowd behind me and were just appalled by what they saw. And I said to them, this is the only place in America where you are seeing this kind of event take place. Think about it. I mean, you guys, the Bill Stadium is empty on Sundays. There would normally be 70,000 people there. The government in Western New York and New York State, they're wrestling with the idea of whether or not it's appropriate to have 7,000 people in that venue. And yet the president of the United States, whose own CDC is the one that is offering up these guidance that local governments are using to prevent these kind of gatherings, is inviting people to come and be a part of these events. So from my personal perspective, I always wear a KN95 mask, which is designed to not only protect people around me, but also to protect me. I literally never take it off from the second I get into the venue, meaning I don't drink or eat at all while I'm at these events. And the one thing the Trump campaign has done that I give them credit for is that they have penned off the press and given us our own kind of little 6 feet enclaves where we theoretically should be away from other people. But there is always going to be a degree of you're shoulder to shoulder with people as you're coming in, when you want to use the bathroom. You can't avoid it on some level. So I feel in many ways like I've dodged a bullet up until this point, that I've been able to prevent getting coronavirus up until this point. I just actually took a test yesterday in order to be part of the vice presidential debate. And I must have tested negative because they call you the second you test positive. And so I'm just thankful for that. And I worry every single day that I'm going to make one wrong move that's going to put me in danger and could potentially put my family in danger. And it's, this is all basically at the direction of the president of the United States, who now finds himself in that situation. And I guess what's most baffling about it is he's in the hospital right now, and yet his campaign is still planning an in-person rally with the vice president on Thursday after this debate. And there's a good chance that I'm going to be at it. So yeah, it's nerve-wracking. But I think, the reason I'm doing it is because I feel like it's my responsibility as a reporter to take that risk, to tell that story in an unbiased way, because that's part of what our job is at CNN. And I have colleagues that go into war zones, that cover hurricanes, that are in the middle of these protests that turn violent. It's a risk, but I think it's a risk worth taking because I think the reporting is so important.
We're in conversation with CNN reporter and North Tonawanda native Ryan Nobles. And I think that when you attend these Trump campaign events and you are in the crowd, essentially, I mean, you're sequestered a bit, but you're exposed to his fans, to his supporters. To me, it's reminiscent of that, when we have to leave the press box to get to the Bills locker room, we have to walk past a concourse and outside out in the public for a little bit to get down into the tunnel that takes us to the locker room. It's probably what Mike Rodak had to experience being out among the Bills fans for even so much as 20 seconds, just the hate that you're faced with. I know you're supposed to shrug that off. And, as professionals, I mean, to a much lesser degree, us in sports, the emails that we get, the comments, the tweets of people who would like to see bad things happen to us because we have an opinion on, or we maybe used to have an opinion on Josh Allen or the Sammy Watkins trade. How do you handle it from a psychological standpoint? I'm guessing it's got to be at the very minimum exhausting, but I'm guessing the stress is there because you don't know what's going to happen, and you don't want to have to deal with it, even if it's trying to look somebody in the eye and say, "Hey, chill out." Even that comes with a high degree of like, "Come on, just let me do my job." But you can't.
Yeah, it's. I have to say, I've been a reporter now for more than 20 years, and I've dealt with a lot of vitriol from viewers for whatever reason, because, as journalists, we are often, especially as a news reporter, you are often the bearer of bad news. And a lot of times, people want to shoot the messenger, frankly. And this is different though, because it's a little bit more about us specifically than it is about the topics. The president has turned us into his adversary. But what's interesting, Tim, is it's funny because there's a mob mentality to it to a certain extent, where, you get a group of people that are together in a confined space and they get whooped up by someone who they believe in, and they'll say things that they wouldn't say, I don't think, if it were just you one-on-one. And what I found is that, to a person, the average Trump supporter I meet and I cover, and I say the same thing for Bernie supporters, because there's a lot of toxicity in his fan base as well. When you get to start talking to them and you have a conversation with them, they're normal people. They're people that have struggles and problems that they're dealing with, and for whatever reason they're attracted to the president and his policies. And they're nice. They can, and even when you tell them you work for CNN, they don't punch you. I just think, I think sometimes one of the things I've tried to do, and I've worked really hard at in covering this campaign, is understand that the toxic nature of our politics right now has a root cause, right? And I don't necessarily think that Donald Trump is the root cause. I think he's a symptom of this cancer that we have right now. And what I've learned covering the Bernie campaign and now covering the Trump campaign is that there's a lot of Americans that are dealing with a lot of anxiety for a lot of reasons. It could be economic. It could be from a health perspective. It could be from family reasons. And that's in part why we've lost faith in our institutions. And what I try and do is remove that kind of anger that's directed at me and try and get past that and try and understand what that is drawn from. And it's often drawn from a place of pain. And so, I prefer to try and turn this into a positive experience and try and learn more about why people are feeling this way, because I think that's my job as a reporter, But to your point, it's not easy sometimes. I came back from the Tulsa rally, which was really toxic, and I went to an event in Arizona a couple days later, which was also, just filled with racial rhetoric and things that I just, couldn't believe I was heard coming from the mouths of fellow Americans. And it drags on you, man. And you just try to figure out how you can contribute to the process in a positive way. And sometimes that's really hard to do.
What about introducing as some sort of side, like you go to sporting events and, they might even have a bounce house for the kids, a place for you to throw a football through a hole, whatever. What about like a table jumping station for Trump supporters that would maybe help them get some of this out of their system? I think that might be therapeutic.
Yeah, Tim, you're the first person to suggest that, and maybe I should, send that up the chain. I do think maybe releasing some of that anxiety into a folding table might actually calm some nerves. That actually could be beneficial in some way, shape, or form.
We're talking to CNN reporter and North Tonawanda native Ryan Nobles, and I don't want to just totally dominate this with politics, although we probably, and I'm maybe cutting off Jonah and Matthew from asking some more questions. But let's get into the Bills now. Maybe if at the end, maybe we'll have something that comes up. But I don't want to dominate your morning out there in Salt Lake City. You have a lot of prep to do for the vice presidential debate on Wednesday. Ryan, your Bills 4-0. First off, you're out in Salt Lake City. The fact that the game was in Vegas, did that make it easier to find the game on television?
So one of the benefits of working at CNN is that we are now owned by AT&T, which also owns DirecTV. So that means I have a free access to the NFL Sunday Ticket, which I was already a subscriber to, but it's now just a lot cheaper. So I always have access to a Bills game. It does not matter where I am. I've made sure of that. But shockingly, I had my iPad all set up to go in this hotel room, expecting to watch it on there, and it was on TV here. So I think it was on because my brother is in New York City, and I think he said it was on where he was too. So I think it had greater national coverage than I even realized. So I watched it on a big screen TV here in my hotel room, and yeah, enjoyed it immensely. I've enjoyed this season immensely. It's funny, I have a 3-year-old son who is just now starting to kind of become aware of football and what it means. And he's got a Josh Allen jersey, and Josh Allen's become his favorite player. And he actually said to my wife yesterday, because we do this weird thing, if you see on Instagram, I sometimes post it, where when they score a touchdown, the kids kind of run up and I like throw them up in the air to celebrate the touchdowns. And, in past seasons, there weren't too many celebrations, frankly. And yesterday, the Bills had already scored 4 touchdowns. And Jack was like, how come when's the next touchdown? Shouldn't there be another touchdown by now? So there, as a 3-year-old, he's seeing an era of Bills football that, I hadn't seen since I was in high school.
You might have to enhance your insurance for your family, and just with all the scoring that's going on, somebody could get hurt.
Yes. Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah. But, the one thing I would say about this team, that's so different than the other teams, and it's only 4 games in, where they're 4-0 in 2008, right? Is that they just seem like they're a good team, which I know is kind of a simplistic way to put it. But I texted that to my father and brother yesterday. I'm like, this is just a damn good football team, and I don't think they played their best football on Sunday, but they won easily without playing their best football against, I think the Raiders are a pretty good team. They were certainly banged up, but I am just impressed at how they do the basic functions of football in a very efficient and good way, which is just something that Bills teams over the past 20 years just have not done.
Yeah, much like your transition going from covering Bernie Sanders to Donald Trump, it's a bit jarring for us too, finding the words, saying, because that's the simplest way to put it, right? Like, oh, this Bills team is good. That's all I can say. I don't really, I have not been here before. I'm still figuring out how all this works.
I empathize with you, Matthew. I think that's 100% right. I mean, it's just weird to see them, not take us. My wife always jokes because, her football IQ is not that high. She only really watches the games because I do. She's much more of a baseball fan, but she, in past seasons, every time they would score a touchdown, she'd be like, well, just wait for the flag. And there would often always be a flag. And this year it's like, she said to me after the 3rd game, she's like, I don't think they ever had a touchdown or a score called back because of a flag. And I'm like, yeah, no, this is a different team. They don't need to do that anymore to score. They can actually do it.
They don't need to cheat.
Yes, exactly. They can actually just functionally do this.
What has been the thing you're most drawn to when watching these guys? Well, Josh Allen's the easy answer. So let's say beyond Josh Allen, what are you getting the most entertainment out of?
I really have been. I mean, I think the wide receiver core and more. I mean, obviously they're talented, but I just think the way they play together has been so exciting to see. I mean, one of the things I love so much about the '90s Bills was that they seemed like brothers. That this was a family, and they were in it together. And I know a lot of that is manufactured in theater, just for our edification. But I genuinely get the sense that Diggs and Beasley and Brown and Gabriel, the new guy, love each other. And just, they're as excited when they see Cole go up and drag a ball from midair between two receivers as they are if they were to score themselves. And I think that's got to be at least a big part of the reason as to why Allen has really come into his own, because he knows this text thread I have with my brother and father during the games, I said this to them yesterday. It's clear that not only does Josh have confidence in himself, which, he seems to have always been a confident guy, but he clearly has confidence in them. I mean, you don't whip a ball 90 miles an hour between two defenders unless you think that, somebody like John Brown's going to catch it like he did on that catch yesterday that clearly should have been called a touchdown. And so I think that's been the most exciting thing for me. And I mean, not to go on and on about this, but I also just absolutely love Trey White. I love his intensity. I love, the fact that he's always got a big smile on his face. And I also think he's a tremendous ambassador for the Buffalo Bills. I love that a guy like him is wearing the Bills jersey, because I just think he's a decent human being and is just a great guy and a great person to have on our team.
Yeah, you make a great point about the confidence that these guys have in each other, the confidence Josh has in them. And I think, it's an element that I hadn't really considered. Tim wrote, after the first week that the Bills were getting a little crazy with all the designed runs and things that Josh Allen was doing. And there's an element of that where you look at it and say, yeah, just don't get this guy hurt. But I think the part of it I hadn't considered until, this weekend and then yesterday, where he didn't run the ball at all, was that those guys are feeding off of the idea that he's putting the ball in their hands, which is something he said he's going to do for a long time. Now he's finally doing it. 9 different receivers caught a pass yesterday.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the fact that some of these guys are catching passes, I mean, they worked who's the return specialist?
Andre Roberts.
Andre Roberts. I mean, he ended up catching a pass yesterday and made a great catch yesterday. The idea that somebody like him would be working into the mix when you have such an amazing core of receivers on the top, and the fact that they would actually utilize him, it's Patriots-esque, right? I mean, that's what Bill Belichick does, is these guys who nobody else knows on the roster, are finding ways to contribute, and a guy like Brady would find them. And that's what Allen's doing this time around as well. Yeah. I mean, it's just, it's a pleasure to watch. I hope it stays this way, but I guess that's the big difference too, is that none of it feels like a fluke. Even, when they were 5-3 under Fitz, and when they were 4-0 in 08, it's like they were 4-0, but they were 4-0, but they got lucky to be 4-0. This team earned every one of these wins this week, and against, I think, reasonably good competition. I think Miami's better than a lot of people are giving them credit for. I mean, I think the Rams could potentially be a Super Bowl contender, and the Raiders are a pretty good team. I think I think they're legit this year, and how far that takes them. I mean, I at least would like to see a home playoff game. But I also should point out that it is just the peak of irony that this is happening all in a pandemic year. And, there's just as good a chance that they go to the playoffs and we enjoy that as there are that the season just completely gets canceled and they run into a wall and are not able to take advantage of this magic that they've created.
Hey, Ryan, do you think it's a coincidence the last time the Bills were 4-0, Joe Biden was on the ticket with Barack Obama, and now he's leading the Democratic contingent in this election. Is there any connection there?
I mean, maybe, Biden was on the ticket twice. They weren't that good in 2012. So that might put a bit of a hole in that argument, but you never know. I mean, I think Biden has a lot of Buffalo blue collar attraction to him. He's the kid from Scranton, which is very similar to a town like Buffalo. So, we'll take what we can get at this point, right?
I'm going to give a little fair warning here. I have, this has nothing to do with anything we're talking about other than the fact that we're talking. I have a dog who hates when I'm on the phone, and I have this new office. She's getting wound up. So we may have an extra guest here on the show. She does not like the sound of these voices coming out of the computer down here in my office. And so anyway, just fair warning. Matt brings up a point. Well, you guys all brought up a point here, really, the political aspect. And with COVID, Ryan, I think there's probably a few people in the country who can speak on this or who have maybe thought about it in this way, because you just did broach it. What concern, and I don't mean this flippantly, what level of concern do you have that we may have some socio-economic, racial, whatever strife from the election? We still have coronavirus cases. They're starting to rise in 20 states, I think it is. I saw on CNN this morning, 5 where it's dramatic, including the state of New York, where everybody's uneasy. We have what's happening with the Tennessee Titans. It is COVID is affecting sports again. But even with the election result and what may happen, we saw, players boycotting in the NBA, who knows what's going to cause these players from, a team that isn't even the Bills to say we're going to boycott for a while because of what's going on in America. What's your level of concern that this season might not end?
Yeah,
this season might not finish.
I mean, I think it's like, I think it's like a 50-50 proposition right now. The one thing I will say is, and I think this is so important given the fact that the president has now been diagnosed with coronavirus. I mean, there's 2 ways to perceive the president's positive diagnosis. The one is that, well, oh my gosh, if the leader of the free world can get coronavirus, we're all going to get it. But I think the other one is that if you take the steps necessary and if you listen to the science and you live your life in a way that takes as many steps possible to mitigate the risk of your exposure, you can still accomplish things. And listen, I could get it tomorrow, but I feel like I'm living proof of that, right? Like I've been on planes a lot. I've been, I've had to go to restaurants because we're on the road and that's the only way you're going to eat. I've been inside these rallies, but I'm always wearing a mask. I'm constantly washing my hands. I'm sanitizing my hands every chance I get. I'm always as far away from other people as I possibly can, and I haven't got it yet. And I mean, I think you look at the hockey experience, the baseball experience, and even baseball, which had, its hiccups, but is going to probably complete the season. There's a way to do it. It's not easy. You're going to end up with breakouts from time to time, like with what Tennessee's dealing with right now, but it is possible. I think the problem that the country's facing right now, and this is the reason the president has contracted the virus, is that there's still a significant part of this country that for whatever reason doesn't want to listen to the science and will not take the proper precautions, wants to continue to just live their lives as if this thing doesn't exist. And if that continues to perpetuate, if we still have, 30% of the country that refuses to wear a mask under any circumstance, or refuses to not throw parties, or refuses to not do all these things that would greatly reduce the chances of the outbreaks happening, then it isn't, the NFL season's not going to end. The NFL season is going to end, and a bunch of other things that we come to appreciate are also going to be postponed indefinitely. So, there is a way through this. Other countries have done it very successfully. This isn't, magic. It's science. And if you've listened to the recommendations from these people that are really smarter than I am, you can do it. And we can open schools back up. We can start to be able to go to sporting events again. And, I think the thing that struck me the most was, in terms of wearing a mask, which is, I just think, the very most important thing. And it's not that hard. I have to wear a mask for my job like 90% of the day. You just get through it. You figure it out. There's a level of adjustment. But the one of the makers of the vaccine, who stands to benefit financially in a massive way through the production of the vaccine, his recommendation is that we already have a vaccine and it's called a mask. So, once we get over this hump and people start to figure that out, and maybe the president's diagnosis can lead us to that, I think it's possible to get back to some sort of semblance of life, but it's going to take some time.
Yeah, we're in conversation with Ryan Nobles of CNN and native of North Tonawanda. But it's human nature. Even if the president were to come out and say, you know what, I was wrong about it, there would be an element of his supporters who would say that it's fake news, or that Trump is saying this because he's playing 4D chess. Because on social media especially, or even face-to-face, so many people have dug in on the stance that it is a hoax, or that it's not a big deal, that now even if Trump were to come out and say that it's fine, it's difficult for a human being to admit, I've been fighting the wrong fight for 7 months. Yeah. And so it's easier just to say, no, I'm sorry, I'm not changing my mind. But I wanted to ask a little bit about the potential for social unrest in November. Where do you think that could, or how much do you think that could impact, and not just sports? I don't want to be so trivial as to leave it to sports, but could impact just our day-to-day life and all the things that we enjoy and that we look for as a diversion. There's a lot of people are predicting bad things.
I'm worried about it. I don't know how much to be worried about it. Obviously we have seen a lot of anger from a lot of Americans because of what has happened with police brutality and the targeting of African Americans in many places. And I don't think that has gone away. That continues to be a serious problem. And then if you compound that with a contested election, it is all the ingredients for what could be a dangerous cocktail. I think the biggest thing that I think the average American needs to understand, that doesn't kind of like consume politics the way I do, is that there is going to be required of us a level of patience in the vote counting process, which is something we're not accustomed to, right?
We want a winner at 8:00 on election.
Yeah.
Not even,
exactly.
we're not even going to wait until, we've heard from over half the states. We're just going to go ahead and declare the winner.
That's 100% right. And so we have the dynamic of so many people voting by mail this year for obvious reasons. And let me state emphatically that voting by mail is safe, accurate, and is not wrought with fraud, despite the fact that that's what President Trump has been trying to tell us. So that's just it's going to take a lot longer to count those ballots than what we would normally have on a normal election day. So it could take a week. It could take 2 weeks to figure out who won the election. And just because it takes 2 weeks doesn't mean that something's wrong. It just means that the process is harder because of it. So what concerns me is that the president has laid the groundwork for so many of us to be wary of this vote counting process. And because we don't get the answers immediately, that people are going to fill that void with suspicion, that leads to bigger problems. And then, you combine that with the already serious tensions that we're facing as it relates to race relations in this country, Second Amendment rights, all these things that people are worried about, and something bad could happen. While I don't deny that reality, I still believe fundamentally that we still have the best system and that we're going to figure this out. And I think the election results are going to be clear enough that we know who the winner is and who the loser is. And I think that you're going to see a lot of the rhetoric that's built up ahead of a campaign dies down exponentially after we know who won. And I think that, even these Republicans that have kind of helped fuel the president's, frankly, lies about the voting system, I think that once the results become clear, are going to temper that quite a bit. And there's going to be a swift move for whatever transition takes place. And that includes the possibility that the president could win the election, because he could. So, we're at a breaking point right now, but a lot of that, I think, subsides after the results come in. So just hopefully there's enough patience to get that process going. And I'll just make this point quickly, Tim, about, the difference between before an election and after an election. I always joke that I get requests like this from you like crazy prior to an election. Everybody wants to talk to me right up until election day. And then I'm always like, well, people are going to want to talk to me after the election too. It's crazy. Like the second the results come in, everybody's moved on to the next big thing. Nobody's interested in a political reporter from November 9th through, until the next election starts. So usually people are very good at putting it in the rearview mirror pretty quickly.
Well, we're going to have you back to talk about the Bills, or maybe even
All right,
the Sabres. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe.
TNT football.
Yeah. Well, my son, Jack, who I told you about before, likes the Bills a lot, but he is a massive hockey fan. His name is Jack, so he is a huge Jack Eichel fan, and hockey is undoubtedly his favorite sport. So hopefully there is a hockey season of some ilk, and hopefully the Sabres will actually have the type of season that the Bills are having, or at least, something close to that. It would be nice to see them in the playoffs, because I love playoff hockey.
Okay, now you're in Northern Virginia, and he gets exposed to Alex Ovechkin quite a bit, and
Yeah.
Alex Ovechkin might be my favorite hockey player of all time. So I understand the appeal. Is there danger of losing him to the Capitals, or are you going to force him to be a Sabres fan?
So I am.
And that might be grounds for CPS to come and visit you if you're pissed that he's a Sabres fan.
Yeah, I know, right? That's always been my worry. So I've tried to indoctrinate the kids from a very young age about where our sports fandoms lie. But I think that I've got to let the process happen organically. I've laid the cards on the table. It's interesting because my daughter, I have a 10-year-old daughter, and she got really wrapped up in the Nats run to the World Series. And we go to a ton of Nats games because they're easily accessible. CNN has a ticket package, so that gets us into the stadium on a pretty fairly regular basis. We're big Mets fans. But it was interesting as the Nats were making their run to the World Series, my daughter kind of timidly came up to me one day and said, "Daddy, is it okay if I want the Nats to win the World Series?" Because, all of her friends in school were wearing Nats gear and everybody was kind of getting whooped up for it. So, yeah, I mean, if the Bills and the Sabres don't start winning at a more regular clip, I fear that we may lose them, at least on some level. But I think that I've at least built a bit of, kind of familial connection to it, that they'll always be Bills and Sabres and Mets fans on some level, I hope.
The Bills are going to leave their mark on them this year, I think, and last year too. They were good last year, so I think that the joy that you have if you're able to watch the games with them enough on Sundays, I think will probably leave their mark. The Sabres, you might have to wait a while.
Well, it also doesn't hurt that Washington's football team is just an absolute disaster, so that certainly helps the Bills' case in a big way. Yeah.
Anything else for Ryan, guys, before we let you go? No?
I think.
Just want to clear the deck here. Any lingering questions for Ryan?
If I could ask, Trump's made college football, Big Ten football, somewhat of an issue in his campaign. I've seen kind of politicization of high school football around here. People will blame the Democratic politicians that we're not playing in New York and point at Republican-led states where they are playing. When you're on the trail, if you're talking to voters, how much have you seen whether sports, football, and being able to play during a pandemic is an issue for voters in any of these states?
I think there's at least a swath of the votership where this is their top priority, frankly. Some of these states, that don't have professional sports in particular, the college teams dominate their thought process. I mean, like Ohio has pro teams, but there's not a single unifying team in the state of Ohio more than the Ohio State Buckeyes. It doesn't matter if you live in Toledo, Cincinnati, Columbus, any city in Ohio, you are a Buckeye fan. That's just the way it is, even if you didn't go to Ohio State. So the idea that you're not going to be able to watch your Buckeyes every Saturday is definitely something that, is part of people's DNA. My brother-in-law he lives in North Carolina now, but he's a huge Ohio State fan. He's from Ohio originally. And, that's, his Saturdays are dominated by that. So I think, what the president is really good at doing is linking A to B and then taking credit for it. So, he called for the Big Ten to start the season. They did. And then, I'm sure between that point and the second point, there were 1,000 things that happened to allow the Big Ten to start back up again, but he took credit for it. And, that resonates with a certain group of people. If Ohio State football is the most important thing to you, then that might help influence your vote. Is it, a tipping point issue? Is it going to be enough to decide the election one way or another? I doubt it, but there probably isn't one issue that's a tipping point issue. And I do think every one of these things contributes to it. It's not as if Joe Biden was saying, don't play football. I should point that out. I think he just, there's just a different approach to this. And it's difficult to say which approach is going to have greater resonance with the average American.
Yeah. Repealing Obamacare or Big Ten football. I mean, they're pretty much even. Really?
Well, I mean, I know, Tim, you're laughing about it, but for some people it is,
I know it is. I'm from Ohio.
I know.
There are a lot of people out there that's all they want. They work hard during the week. Obamacare doesn't affect them or any major issue. It doesn't affect me, but on Saturdays, I'm stuck with raking my leaves. I normally buy a 6-pack. I hang out with my 2 buddies and we watch the game. And that is my little slice of heaven for the week. Right. I look forward to it, and I don't have that this year. And now all of a sudden I do, and so fine. So Trump got me football, and so I'll vote for Trump.
Yeah, no, it's that simple. And you know what? I don't judge anybody's reason for voting. I had a wise political analyst tell me a long time ago, the number one reason people vote is in their own self-interest. I mean, that's why we all vote. And for some people, it's healthcare. For some people, it's abortion. For some people, it's college football. And, that's the beauty of the right to vote, is that we all get to choose for ourselves what motivates us to vote. And if, Tim, you laid it out perfectly. If that is what makes you happy, you're going to be motivated by that. And so, yeah, I do think it's a factor. And it's a good question, Jonah. I don't know how big of a factor it is, but it's, one of many that are going to influence the outcome of this election.
You see Western New York politicians play with it all the time. And it's not even Western New York. It's Senator Schumer. It's Governor Cuomo. If there was ever any doubt that they could be reelected, you'd be, Bill's Stadium. There'd be all kinds of stuff, to make sure. If you want to make sure that you win the vote in Western New York, talk about funding a Bill's Stadium, I think would probably be a very big political issue. Yes, there'd be people pushing back saying we don't want that money for Bills, we want it for the schools. But I think that a brand new sparkling stadium that looked really nice out in either in downtown or out in Orchard Park again would make people say, wow, whoever was in charge of that, I'm voting for them again.
Yep. I agree with you.
Well, Ryan, thanks for joining us. I kept you for a lot longer than I wanted to, but very nice of you to give us your morning. Now coming into the afternoon here in Eastern time zone. Have a smooth debate in terms of coverage on Wednesday. Hopefully it comes off and you're not in Salt Lake City for no reason, but looks like everything's full steam ahead for Kamala Harris and Mike Pence on Wednesday.
Yep, that's what it looks like, guys. I appreciate you having me on. I so appreciate your coverage on The Athletic. As I told you before, I continue to be a subscriber, and I will.
Thank you.
For the foreseeable future. So keep up the great work, and it's nice to have. I truly mean this. It is a blessing to have such top-notch journalists like you guys, the crew at WGR, Adam Bonini, who I've known for a long time because I used to work at an NBC affiliate. Buffalo is very fortunate to have the quality level of journalists that cover not just our sports teams, but cover the news in general. So that's one of the reasons I got in to journalism, was because of the folks that I followed when I lived there. So keep up the good work. Those of us that live far away really appreciate it.
Ryan, you're absolutely right. People here should be fortunate to have us. Hey, again, I'm grateful for your time, Ryan. You're a super busy guy, and to come on and talk Bills was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
Right.
I appreciate
That's
it.
Ryan Nobles
Thanks,
of CNN in North Tonawanda here on a Monday edition of Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by Shampoo Travis, Besaw, Kirshner, CPAs and Business Consultants. Matthew Fairburn of The Athletic for Bronstein, Jonah Bronstein of Bronstein and Bronstein, sports injury attorneys. Thanks for joining us. And hey, Ryan jumps back on to say hello. He wasn't using an imposter. Thanks to everybody for listening. Take care.
All right. See you guys.